Hey, what is up everybody? It's Animac here for AnimeUproar, and it is finally here! The first chapter of the direct sequel to the 7 Deadly Sins manga has arrived. This chapter calls this new manga the long-awaited return of the 7 Deadly Sins, so even though it's called the 4 Nights of the Apocalypse, we can consider this series as a sort of 7 Deadly Sins Part 2. In fact, the very first chapter of the sequel directly mentioned some characters from the original series. So we can be confident that our old friends from the original manga will show up in this series eventually. I will be breaking down the first chapter and what it all means for all of us 7 Deadly Sins fans, so let's get into it. If you enjoyed the 7 Deadly Sins content on this channel and you want us to keep it going, please leave a like and comment. It only takes a second, but it really does help. And if you happen to be new to the channel, or maybe you just haven't subscribed yet, make this the video that you subscribe and hit that notification bell to turn on all notifications. If you never want to miss a 7 Deadly Sins or 7 Deadly Sins sequel video in the future, you really have to go through the trouble of hitting that bell and then selecting the option that says all. If you don't do that, you're still gonna miss a ton of our videos even if you are subscribed. It's just how YouTube works. Finally, this video will of course contain spoilers for the first chapter of the 7 Deadly Sins sequel, so please proceed with caution. You have been warned. The new story starts off with a brand new hero named Percival, and to be perfectly honest, this guy kind of looks like Meliodas if Meliodas had green hair. Percival is just about to turn 16, so he's a couple of thousand years younger than Meliodas when we first met him. And Percival lives with only his grandfather on top of a massive pillar-shaped mountain that seems to be completely isolated from the outside world. But despite being just 16 years old, and despite looking more like a 12-year-old than a 16-year-old, Percival is already extremely strong and agile. For example, he's able to jump off the steep mountain, grab a massive blue demon, and climb back up the mountain while carrying the blue demon with one arm. Clearly, Percival's strength is far beyond the strength of an average human. We're not sure at this point whether he is just a normal human or whether he has some more interesting genetics, but that's something that we're going to find out in the future. It's worth mentioning that Percival and his grandpa don't actually refer to the bird as a demon, they call it a stone bird. So it's possible that Percival doesn't even know what demons are at this point in the story. We then get a hint about why Percival is already so strong. At least part of the reason is the fact that his massively jacked Chad of a grandfather has been training with him every single day of his life. This training includes intense hand-to-hand combat training through wrestling, sparring, and so on. Although Percival's grandfather can still beat him in a fight, it is clear that the grandpa has to give it his all just to win, and the grandpa also has to use his superior size to his advantage. So, even though Percival's grandpa is an absolute Chad with a lot more combat experience, Percival is already close to surpassing him in strength despite being much younger and much smaller. Again, this hints that there could be something special about Percival. He might not be just a normal, average human. We then learn that the massive pillar-shaped mountain that Percival and his grandpa live on is called God's Finger, and its tip is located above the clouds. In fact, from the top of God's Finger, you can see the shadow of Sky Island, or the Sky Temple, which is the home to the Celestials from the 7 Deadly Sins Prisoners of the Sky movie. If you've been watching this channel for a while, then you know that I've been saying that the movie should be considered canon, or at least semi-canon. And that's because many of the things that were first hinted at in the movie were later confirmed in the manga. This is just the latest example of that. The Celestials and their Sky Temple home are real, and they are indeed canon in the 7 Deadly Sins sequel. Now, it seems that Percival has never actually left God's Finger, so his grandpa tells him that somewhere below the mountain there is an entire land called Britannia. And this land has twisting towers, knights who sail ships of illusions through the heavens, caves with countless openings that lead to hell, and even an evil lake princess that tempts heroes and imprisons them. This is a direct reference to the Lady of the Lake, who already showed up in the original 7 Deadly Sins manga, and who also showed up in the Lancelot side story. In fact, we can assume that she was the one who lured Lancelot and Jericho away from Bon and Elaine. According to Percival's grandpa, both he and Percival's father left their homes when they were 16 to go on an adventure, and the same is expected of Percival. At first, Percival says that he isn't interested in adventure since he's perfectly happy living on the mountain with his grandpa, but secretly he is itching to go on an epic adventure like every other great shonen protagonist. Percival just doesn't want to make his grandpa feel bad since it was his grandpa who cared for him and raised him for all of these years in this isolated place. But everything changes when the Red Knight appears. One day, a knight wearing red armor and sailing a flying boat arrives on the mountain. It seems that that blue demon was a messenger who had been serving this knight, and when the bird was shot down by Percival's grandpa, the Red Knight was able to somehow trace this location. This Red Knight, whose real name is Ironside, has been searching for Percival's grandpa for years, and it seems that Percival's grandpa decided to raise Percival in this isolated place in order to hide him from the Red Knight. But why did he need to hide Percival, and who is this Red Knight and what does he want? That becomes the million-dollar question as this chapter progresses. The knight already knows that the name of Percival's grandpa is Balgis, and it turns out that both Balgis and the Red Knight were once holy knights of Camelot, and those are the knights who served King Arthur Pendragon directly. In fact, exactly 16 years ago, the Red Knight and Balgis parted ways for some reason. And that date roughly corresponds to Percival's current age, which means that the reason that the two men parted ways may be directly connected to Percival's birth. At first, Percival believes the Red Knight's story that he and Balgis are good friends, and he points the Red Knight in the direction of his grandfather. As the knight leaves Percival to play with his floating ship, he casually mentions that Balgis is a cruel man for raising Percival while hiding the truth. I'm not sure what truth the Red Knight was referring to, but it is definitely related to Balgis' past. Percival wasn't even aware that the Holy Knights existed, so it's clear that Balgis has been hiding his past from his grandson, and there must be a good reason for that. As soon as the Red Knight sees Balgis, he attacks him, and we learn that the sword that Balgis was using as a kitchen knife was actually an honored gift from His Majesty King Arthur himself. It seems that the Red Knight and Balgis both betrayed King Arthur 16 years ago. Although Balgis claims that the Red Knight and his faction turned against Arthur, while Balgis merely abandoned him. As Balgis and the Red Knight do battle, the Knight reveals a special power. He can create star-shaped cuts of all sizes on anything he chooses just by motioning with his fingers. This includes the bodies of his opponents and much harder surfaces such as rocks and cliffs. At this point, Percival tries to intervene and help his grandpa, but even though he gives it a noble effort, the Red Knight is just too strong. Using his magic power, the Red Knight creates dozens of cuts on Balgis' body in a matter of seconds. And then he injures Percival as well, leaving a star-shaped cut right across his chest. But even that cut doesn't deter Percival, and he actually tries to punch the knight despite the pain of the cut. Unfortunately, this has no effect on the knight, and he merely kicks Percival out of the way. Still, the fact that Percival is able to withstand such injuries and just keep fighting hints at the fact that he may not be an ordinary human. There is probably something going on with him that we are going to find out later on in the story. When Balgis asks the Red Knight why he came to kill him now, the knight reveals that an ominous prophecy was made only a few days ago. The prophecy told of an existence that will lead King Arthur to his doom, and the name of this existence is the Four Knights of the Apocalypse. The Red Knight claims that for all he knows, Balgis is one of the four knights, so he has to be taken out. But that sounds pretty suspicious to me. Why would the Red Knight care about protecting King Arthur when he was the one who turned against him 16 years ago? This kind of smells fishy to me. Confident that Balgis has been fatally wounded, Ironside the Red Knight leaves. Thankfully, Percival, despite being injured, seems to be okay, but his grandpa is not so lucky. Balgis eventually succumbs to his many wounds, but before he does, he reveals that the Red Knight is apparently Percival's father.
not true.
Percival can't believe that this man who has done such terrible things could be his father, but unfortunately, Balgus doesn't have enough time left to explain everything. He simply tells Percival to prepare to start his journey and to seek out the answers for himself. Tragically, Balgus then dies in his grandson's arms, and with his final breath, he calls Percival his dear grandson and his hope. Percival is understandably heartbroken at the loss of his grandfather. This is the man who raised him, and he is practically the only person that Percival has ever interacted with because the two of them spent so much time in complete isolation. After burying his grandfather, Percival takes his helmet and cape, and he sets out on his adventure down the mountain and into the world of Britannia. I would like to think that he also took his grandfather's sword, the one that was given to him by King Arthur, although this is not explicitly shown. So, a very interesting first chapter, and a lot of fascinating lingering questions that I can't wait to learn more about. First of all, why was Balgus hiding Percival? That seems to be what he was doing on God's finger, but the Red Knight didn't seem all that interested in Percival. So was Balgus hiding Percival from his father, or from someone or something else? Speaking of which, is the Red Knight really Percival's father, or is the story more complicated? Like, for example, is Ironside being controlled by some evil force or something like that? There is definitely a demon connection there with that blue demon that showed up earlier, but we'll have to wait and see. And of course, I am also very interested in Percival. Why is he so strong at his age? Is he just an ordinary human who trained really hard, or is there something more to his genetics, something that makes him special? In Arthurian legend, Percival is one of King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table, just like Tristan and Lancelot. Since Tristan and Lancelot are the children of the original sins, we can assume that Percival will be meeting them at some point in the future, and that together they will become the heroes of the new story. Are the four horsemen of the apocalypse really going to bring doom to King Arthur? Are they the villains of the story? Or was the Red Knight lying? Maybe the four knights of the apocalypse are actually the heroes of the story, just like the seven deadly sins turned out to be the heroes in the original story. So are Percival, Lancelot, and Tristan going to end up being three of the four members of the Knights of the Apocalypse? Presumably, the child of King and Deanne would become the fourth member, since we know they do have a child, we just haven't met them yet. I think that would be super cool, and it would be consistent with the Seven Deadly Sins twist in the beginning of the original story. At first we think that the Seven Deadly Sins are wanted traitors, but then we realize that they were framed and they are actually the heroes. That said, I'm also very interested in the Red Knight, Ironside. In Arthurian legend, he is one of the early enemies of Percival. In the legend, the Red Knight stole a cup from King Arthur, so the idea of the Red Knight betraying King Arthur is present in the original legend as well. And in Arthurian legend, Percival eventually kills the Red Knight and takes his red armor for himself. We know that the Seven Deadly Sins story was never a one-for-one retelling of the Arthurian legend, but it was always heavily inspired by it, so we can assume that something similar might happen here. Percival may end up defeating the Red Knight, his alleged father, retrieving whatever it is that he stole from King Arthur, and taking his red armor for himself. Now, in the original Arthurian legend, Percival is raised in a forest by his mother until he is 15. And just like the Percival in the manga, he is raised completely ignorant of the ways of the world. But when he sees a group of knights passing through the forest, Percival is impressed by them and he decides to become a knight himself. Eventually he ends up in Camelot and becomes one of Arthur's Knights of the Round Table. This seems to be the type of path that the manga Percival is following as well. He was raised in isolation until the age of 16, and he is now setting off an adventure that will probably lead him to becoming one of the Knights of the Round Table. In Arthurian legend, Percival is also connected to the quest for the Holy Grail, so this may end up playing an important role in the sequel story. Whatever happens, I'm excited to find out more about Percival's origins, about the Red Knight, and the mysterious prophecy. I also can't wait to see how Lancelot, Tristan, and the other characters from the original Seven Deadly Sins series will fit into this story. I wonder if the four Knights of the Apocalypse will actually be this story's version of the Knights of the Round Table. Since Arthur is the King of Chaos in this story, maybe his knights will be called the Knights of the Apocalypse. And then Percival will be one of them, along with Tristan, Lancelot, and the child of King and Diane. My guess is that the prophecy that was mentioned is a bit misleading, but we'll have to wait and see. Definitely let me know what you guys thought of this first chapter, and are you excited for this new 7 Deadly Sins story? What do you think is going to happen next, and do you think that there is more to Percival's origins than we realize? Is he really just a human, or does he have some more complicated genetics? And how do you guys think that our heroes from the original 7 Deadly Sins are going to fit into this story? Share your thoughts and opinions down below. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more 7 Deadly Sins sequel videos on this channel, please leave that like. It only takes a second, but it helps a lot. And if you're new to AnimeUproar, or maybe you haven't subscribed yet, make this the video that you subscribe and hit that notification bell to turn on all notifications. You can also hit me up on Twitter and Instagram at AnimeUproar. A big thank you to all of our AnimeUproar patrons who make videos like this one possible. Special thanks to Alpha Sigma, disciple of Lord Twigo himself. And I can't forget our The One tier patrons, the ones who stand above all other clans, including Ingrata, The World, A Quiet Respect, Pate Heffa, Dr. Courtman, Rathian YX, Emperor Otaku, Spidey Life Tanel, Baked Buddhist, and Tungsten Tarkus. Finally, thank you to our Pro Hero tier patrons, including the one and only Gilgamesh, Steelers, Angel Cruz, Anatoly Kazatsky, Joe Stanton, Very Gucci, Jessica Calafond, Rathuin Deora, Alicia Octor, Bonnie Parks, Hinokami and Water, The Red-Haired Raven, Florian, Joanne Garcia, Jack Watches Anime, Fatboy Games, Deadly Saint, Matthew Cruz, Anthony Schreiber, Hijinks, and Mr. Waffles 247. If you feel that our videos provide value for you, consider supporting us on Patreon. Even a single $1 will give you access to our Patreon exclusive Discord, and your name will appear in our videos along with these amazing people. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, see ya, Space Cowboys.